Our journey begins. It's day 36, July 6, 2024, and today we're going to be exploring probably a couple different things, but I'm going to start with finishing the second draft of the principles for the movement. And that we start off with principles of checks and balances. And if possible, I'm going to try to talk while I might just end up talking it out, since the talking it out feature works so well. Alright, principles of checks and balances. It seems that it is wise to prepare for if such a thing as evil does exist, or such a thing as a bad future is possible. And a bad future does seem possible, and things that resemble the idea of evil do seem to exist. Period. The movement should therefore engage in a system of checks and balances, which is somewhat similar to the way that the United States Constitution works, where various institutions have various power, so that at no point can there be a complete dictatorship and utter control from one system or the other. Period. Now, in the movement, where primarily things happen by and through coordination, essentially this means that there will be a transparent software and decentralized leadership, perhaps some degree of centralized leadership. However, the vision of the future, which will become the goal by virtue of it having met the highest probability of being the best possible future, will by virtue be a vision which is held by most and which makes logical sense. The process by which the best possible future is decided is by virtue going to include a democratized system and whatnot. So essentially, and there will also be the way in which we reach that best possible future. And I imagine that this will include some degree of the ethics and morality, which we have actually discussed previously. And those ethics and morality will also go through a system to ensure that they are themselves decided on a system of essentially checks and balances, where no one specifically decides them, but a grand system of logic, statistics, individual opinion. Period. However, in the movement's actual actions, in the things that it has control to do, these things will be governed by what we think to be the best possible future. However, there is a difference between simply saying these things are allowed and what actually end up happening. Essentially, the enforcement aspect. How will the enforcement of the movement be held accountable? This is the key question related to checks and balances, since everything else, all the other decision making, will be checks and balances. Although I assume there will be some sort of initial leadership that will be one of the systems of decision making, and there will be every individual within the movement that will be another system of decision making. And then once that is decided, there will be the sort of original or ongoing constitution that will be another main point of decision making that will sort of be the basis for the logical explanations. Period. But when it comes to enforcement of the actions, there will need to be a check. I guess, first of all, as with anything else in the movement, it must be governed by. So essentially, the things that it should do are clear and are directed by the same thing that everyone else in the movement is directed by. The transparent coordination that is brought about through the vision of the future that is decided. However, to ensure that this is carried out, will there need to be some sort of judicial system, some system to ultimately decide if someone was acting in a certain way. Perhaps a judicial system is required. I could see that it could potentially be needed. And period. To me, the judicial system should be similar to the way in which the best possible future is come about. There will need to be the highest probabilities. There will need to be, and then similar to how the current judicial system works in governments. And this gets into to what extent does the movement actually have control over those sorts of things, or if it's just meant to be a binding force. But as I mentioned, it's likely that other institutions will go away as the movement takes its place. And so the movement, in order to ensure that it does not become dictatorship and whatnot, there will need to be checks and balances. And I think inherently it will have these by the way in which it decides to what future and what actions are taken to meet that future, period. I'm not totally sure if that makes a lot of sense, but it's only the second draft. Principles for transparency. Transparency is of vital importance in a movement which coordinates and a movement which has quite a bit of control of what happens. No one really cares if it coordinates everyone, but people care if it coordinates everyone unfairly, and no one really knows and if the system has favorites and that sort of thing. But as long as the way in which things are coordinated is transparent and somewhat understandable by the average individual, then it should be possible to be okay with taking directives from the movement coordination, period. Transparency should be all the way through. Some say that ignorance is bliss. However, it is typically only unintelligent people who say this. Intelligent people know that the more knowledge that they can have, even if that will mean that they will have to deal with ways that their mind might change, it is always better to have all the information than to be kept guessing and wondering why things are the way they are. Period. Therefore, it would seem that every individual decision should be completely transparent, and the exact things which made the decision one way or the other should be shown and displayed. Any major decisions should be perhaps a short movie created about why that was, or a short essay written in order to explain properly to everyone why that decision was made. And when it comes to leadership decisions, I think it would be important that leadership have to explain fully and justify every decision that they make, and how that decision will end up taking their group or the movement closer toward the best possible future. Period. New line. How can growth be coordinated? Question mark. I think we can look at some things in nature which grow and which seem to coordinate, such as the human body or animals of any kind. Each cell seems to grow, each part of the body seems to grow in coordination, either together or one after the other. It also seems like a forest will grow outward and will structure itself. There are things like a city which will grow, and things will be added later to make it more coordinated. In general, with things like coordination, there's a desire to plan far ahead for how things will be coordinated, or do a post analysis of the system and then make it coordinated, or to simply grow in an organically coordinated matter. I think this third option of the growing organically in a coordinated fashion is the best way. And this best way of growing will probably be an aspect of the answer to the question of what is the best possible way to reach the best possible future. But to begin, let's explore some ideas on how growth can be coordinated. Period. Growth essentially means how more people come on board, how more things are coordinated through the movement, how more resources are distributed, how various bigger projects are undertaken. And I think because by nature this system will be self-organizing, it should have the capacity for large scale, where it can scale up many, many times before things become too disorganized. Particularly if there is a self-organizing AI or self-organizing software which helps govern and maintain the coordination across everything and everyone, growth will by nature be self-organizing. So as long as the self-organizing principles can be properly described and maintained by the self-organizing system, then this answer should be self-evident. How exactly the movement can self-evolve. This is similar to self-growth, except highlights particularly the idea of evolving to something different. Instead of just being a forest which grows and expands, it is as though the forest turns into a city of animals or something different than the original trees. Essentially, this whole idea of the movement is just the starting. This is just the original movement constitution. I have no doubt that things will change significantly, that the vision of the future that we desire will change significantly as we progress, and it should be possible for this vision to evolve, but not in a way which is devastating to humanity. For example, our vision should not necessarily change in the future to be one where we decide to eradicate all humans on the earth. If that vision becomes probable, like probably the best thing to do, it seems unlikely from our perspective at this time that that would be a wise decision, and it would be more likely that something was flawed in the way that decision making was completed, and that the evolutionary process was outlined. Period. The idea of evolutionary processes is that things will change in order to better suit their environment. And I think in the case of the movement, it is that things will change in order to better adjust for the best possible future that seems probable at that given time, as well as the best possible way to reach that future at any given time. Period. Now, both of those things will also evolve as we learn more information, as new people come on board. And so that the very process by which those things are chosen will be evolving. But I think that a similar process, that's very true. I think we will have the initial process where it's a democratized, logical, philosophical, statistical analysis of what is most probably the right answer to any given question. That seems like that would long term be the best way to answer anything. However, it's possible as things evolve that process would change. However, I think I don't know how exactly you would have to rely on the people making decisions to properly justify why they would change it from that. Why would you not use logic? Perhaps because we determined that logical analyses are actually not the way that things are determined. And I, for one, would want the movement to evolve past that then. But I feel as though, from my perspective, that just seems absolutely impossible that would be the case, and that a logical basis would always need to be the basis for decision making. I think essentially we should try it if we're going to overwrite the way or the reason that we do something a certain way. We should use the current system of thinking to overwrite that. And if the current system of thinking still seems to be flawed with the vast majority of people's intuitions, then that should actually be fine because the system takes into account everyone's intuitions. So actually, it seems very unlikely that the way that we couldn't overwrite something the way things are decided. But if it still seems that it's impossible to overwrite something about the way that the best possible future is determined, even though basically everyone knows that that's not the right way to do it, then there would have to be some sort of way for a unanimous opinion-based system could overwrite the current sort of constitutional principle of how things are decided. How are resources shared? ? This is a difficult question because there have been several societal structures which have tried to answer this question already, such as communism, capitalism, and many other types of isms and other societal structures of who controls what land, what resources, who owns this, or who has to be indentured to that. And it seems like we still really have not answered this question to the fullest. It's not necessarily anyone's fault that someone be born into a household where no one owns anything, and so they are constantly having to rent an apartment, and because of that, they never end up gaining any serious capital. Whereas someone else could be born into a family with large pieces of land, which support them simply by being able to rent the land out. Period. So with this trickiness in mind, we can at least say that it should be a transparent system. That as long as it is to some extent transparent, then people can always fight against something if they don't like it. And that will be to the next principle of conflict resolution. So the system will inherently be transparent and show who gets what resources. Also, hopefully, we will reach abundance eventually, and resource distribution will be low priority. However, it seems like in the meantime, and perhaps far into the future, resource distribution will be a critical decision-making process. Will it be that resources are distributed based on how much someone gives to the movement? Will it be based on some other factors? Will it be based on request? Or will it be an equal distribution? Perhaps there's a different way of looking at this, where we could bypass this specific issue. Perhaps instead of the movement necessarily coordinating and deciding who gets what, the movement will simply coordinate with everyone else, where everyone else decides who gets what. Essentially, it be a sort of free economy of resource distribution, but the movement just helps to coordinate all of that so that it goes smoothly, and so that things can operate smoothly. Essentially, if someone is not happy with the resources that they are getting, the movement can explain to them why they're not getting as many resources, that they have to do something or another that will create more resources, and they should coordinate with more people, and that sort of thing. I think that makes the most sense. The movement should not necessarily be deciding resource distribution. I mean, maybe it decides some basic resource distribution, like perhaps the movement is able to generate entirety sense of profit, and so that profit is distributed among those involved. It should still probably be distributed based on how much a person contributed, and along with like a basic where everyone gets the same amount, but then beyond that there is a sort of based on how people contributed, and all of that be transparent. And if people aren't happy with that, then they can be like, yeah, I mean, I didn't contribute all that much, and they can change what they're contributing. think this is an initial answer to that question. How does conflict resolution take place? Question mark. Conflict resolution is something that, if we could get right, could drastically change the world. Inherently in the movement, there will be some sort of conflicts that arise. People who want to do something that's outside the bounds of the movement, that would be considered not the future that people would like to trend toward. And so perhaps the solution to that is that they simply do not continue on within the movement. Or perhaps some group of people would like to change the way the movement decides things, or that sort of thing. And I think as long as the movement is transparent, then there can be judicial hearings on these conflicts, and people can be heard out completely, and it can be understood exactly what the people are saying, if there's any sort of compromises that should be made, and all of that. In general, though, all the other principles of the movement should be avoiding conflict by nature, because things are coordinated. And when things are coordinated, you don't really need to have conflict. Period. New line. Education is seemingly always of top priority, period. The ability for people to become more so the best version of themselves relies significantly on learning about how to become a better version of themselves. And in general, most other aspects of an individual's development relies on education. And so I think that the movement should help coordinate this by creating mentors in a certain area, helping to distribute teaching materials, of course allowing for a sort of network of high-quality free education, allowing for high-end learning modules such as virtual reality education modules, and creating some sense of other students working through projects and educational endeavors to accomplish things. I think originally, I think these are a general sense of what education should be, but in more detail, it's hard to know exactly. Should everyone learn everything by having a giant library that the movement controls? Should there be a separate internet that has only educational material? That sort of thing is unknown, but at least it should be recognized that educational training is a top priority, especially as some people coming into the movement will be from developing countries or developing countries, but will not have an adequate education to understand many of the things that they will need to understand in order to make qualified decisions. Period. So we've gotten through the second draft of some of the primary principles, and does that help us with anything? I think it helps clear some things up, although the solutions to many of the answers aren't necessarily detailed and scientific and philosophical. They're primarily just my intuition on what seems to be decent principles. But also, a lot of these principles rely in basis on what we end up determining to be the best possible future. In fact, if we did know the best possible future and the best possible way to reach that future and the best possible morals and system of ethics that is possible to have, and all of that was evolving and changing properly, I think all the other principles would be a derivative of that, because very likely the best possible future will involve that everyone is properly educated, and so the best possible way to reach that future where everyone is properly educated will involve some sort of system of education, which will be thought through in detail. So it seems like these principles make sense, and actually, while we could dig in philosophically on this level of the principles, we should probably just dig in philosophically related to when we decide what is the actual best possible future and the way to get there. And at that point, we'll dig in philosophically to each individual thing. Period. As we've been going through this, it just seems like this actually makes sense, that when you break it down like this, you start to feel like it could actually be possible to create a sort of original constitution for something that could actually change the world, and that would actually be the best thing for humanity to embark on, by definition of it being reaching toward the best possible future. And of course, the way in which the best possible future is decided is also based on probably AI interviews and all sorts of things like that. Which will rely on lots of individuals. So it's not just my idea of original constitution, but the original constitution itself, the final draft of that, will likely be based on the sort of original group of people that helped to start the movement. So then it seems to me the primary questions remaining before we can really begin rolling this out are the following: New line. Number 1. We'll need to go through the process of determining the best possible future. New line. We'll need to go through the process of determining the best possible way to reach that best possible future. Period. New line. We'll need to determine the best possible system of ethics and morality as a sort of check and balance to the first two. We will need to draft a final version of the original movement with the original members. And finally, we will need to determine how to capture the imagination of most people on Earth and inspire falling in love with the idea of coordinating together to make the world the best place possible. Period. Alright, we will continue thinking through this as we progress. It's been very productive here. I think that talking things out does help quite a bit to make things quite a bit faster. And although there's no punctuation, but that's not too big of a deal. Alright, thank you. Alright, so I'm currently taking a walk on this beautiful morning. It is about 77 degrees, so quite warm, but doesn't feel too bad. It's very still, very humid. The corn is now taller than me. It grows extremely quickly. And I realized there was another question about the movement, which was you have to build the actual coordination process, which I've explored that topic a little bit. It's either going to have to be a software or AI of some kind, essentially. But as I walk in this early morning, there's some early light in the sky and a bit of fog. The beautiful crickets, the smell of the fields. I've been thinking a little bit about how what is going to be kind of the intermediate steps, and or I guess specifically around the original movement members type of thing. I guess I've thought through this a little bit of like, would you have a small group of original members who kind of get it going, Or would you create something super inspiring that then people kind of self-create their groups? But I kind of feel like that's sort of impossible. Like, it seems like really you'd have to have a group of people that kind of start things off and get things going. Essentially, like perhaps me and a group of 20 or 50 other people who are like-minded, and they sort of work together to kick things off, to get things moving. And then we coordinate together and we sort of iron out the whole coordination process and get things going. Because it seems like if you don't have some sort of guinea pig group at the beginning, then you're likely to have like how else, like you have to sort of actually do whatever it is you're planning on doing in order to validate it. And so then that raises the whole question of, okay, well, that group of people, how are we going to start that initial group of people? I suppose it could be something, well, yeah, I'll just start thinking of different ideas of how it could work out. It could potentially work out by doing an online community where I find and do interviews with potentially hundreds of people till we find a group of like 50 people who are all on board with the idea and are willing to start coordinating their actions together to sort of accomplish great things together. And that would be one option. And that would be particularly beneficial, likely, because it's a lot easier to find people online because, first of all, their work is visible. It's not like you have to knock on someone's door to find someone. But yeah, like also you're higher likelihood to like find more about the person, where you can, if they have created anything online, then you can determine more about them. And I think all of that makes sense, and I think that's when things would start to become more real, once the ideas of the movement aren't just some ideas and thoughts that I've been thinking through, but rather start to become a way of life for people. And now, in the beginning, what does that mean? Well, that means you'd be socially connected, so you'd have the ability to chat and sort of go through life together with other people that actually care about other people, that don't just care about themselves. So by virtue of that, you're likely to have a great experience. But then it's a lot cooler down in this little valley. It must drop like 5 degrees. But yeah, sort of by virtue of them being great people, you'd have a great community. But that wouldn't be the only aspects. You would also work together to accomplish great things. And you'd also sort of exponentially benefit each other, where you're pooling resources and helping people to stay accountable. And sort of, humans are social animals, and being social is very important. So then I guess it's time for me to address the fact that currently I'm not the most social in that respect, and there's several reasons for that. First of all, I know that I can be. I am very social, and it creates sort of a desire to be more and more social. And I've already learned that about myself, so I purposely keep a distance with that so that I don't have to constantly be warring against the desire to just go want to be social instead of getting things done. I also sort of have this thought that at this point in my life, I need to figure out what's true for myself rather than having to deal with the drama or having to spend time working through making relationships compatible when you're really not at the point where the relationships that you would have would actually be beneficial to either party in a true way. And I also kind of have the feeling that, like, to really get things done, you just kind of have to work through them yourself. But now I'm at the point where I have kind of worked through things myself, like I'm fairly confident in what makes sense. And then you can go to the proving grounds of talking with people about it and whatnot. So while I'm not currently the most social for those reasons, it's not because I don't want to be. It's because it seems that I cannot be in order to maintain my very strict routine. Not strict, but demanding with all of the health requirements of the routine and all of the work requirements and all of these type of project requirements. It's a lot of work and a lot of thinking, and if your mind is clouded by having to think through interpersonal relationships, it would seem to take away. Plus, I suppose the other major factor is that it wouldn't be too bad if there were people that were on the same track as me, in the sense that they also wanted to live a selfless life and make the world a better place. But finding people like that is extremely rare. In fact, I don't know that I personally know anyone else that is like that. There seems to be people online that like to at least think about those ideas, even if they don't necessarily do them themselves. But it seems like they would at least think about them. But personally, I don't know. And so that's why, I guess another reason is that you become really your closest friends. And so if most of the people I know clearly do not want to live a selfless life, then having friends with them would likely not be beneficial to my development of my inward desire of wanting to live a selfless life. So that's one of the key reasons for sure. And that pretty much goes for relationships of any kind. The main relationships that I have now are family, and they're all fairly strong. And I also have a really good relationship with myself and sort of the things like that. So whether that be having a good relationship toward my thoughts and my body and all the other stuff, that is probably the most important relationship, really. And so basically, I guess that is kind of the trajectory of making my relationship with myself the best that it can be, so that I can then have relationships with others to the best that those relationships can be. And at any rate, more of a personal exposition than figuring things out. All that to say, I think we are getting very ready, very close to the point when we can start to build that initial group of people and to start to invest in creating those relationships more and more. So the most difficult aspect, I suspect that all of this will sort of make sense. Like, I might also think that, by trying to put these ideas into a small group of people, that's going to just drag things down, complicate. You're going to try to be figuring things out. But really, a group of people working on these issues is probably going to be vastly more beneficial than just me working on these issues. And if I'm truly selfless about the matter, then it would make sense to try to come together with others to try to make progress. And if it would only be that others would want to work toward it and do things. So yeah, a couple of the potential challenges is going to be finding those people. And I know that those types of people exist. I don't think it necessarily needs to be governed by age or location or language. I think diversity in all of these things, it's more about their internal heart's desire of their intentions. What do they actually want to do? The other issue could become that, like, I have this sort of initial vision of what I think the movement needs to be, and the initial group, we would still be sort of formulating that vision properly. And so I would want to have a lot of say in how we end up formulating that. And so it would almost be as though I would be sort of a leader or someone who would try to guide things. And if others disagree with that, then I suppose that you would need a sort of hierarchical chain of priority of decision, even though that's not what I ultimately would want the movement to become. And I wonder if adding that dynamic specifically would throw things off. I don't know. I don't think so. Generally, these type of things work themselves out if you have people that come together that are truly selfless and truly just want the best. But then you get into different ideas of this person has a different perspective on how we could accomplish said goal. It's not that, and maybe it's just as valid. And maybe it just comes down to intuition of what might actually work out. And so, the other thing is, I really don't want to have to depend on other people to make this whole journey successful. I want to be able to make this movement successful without having to depend on relationships with other people to make it happen. And I suppose it's a practical trust issue where I can't know for certain that anyone else will actually do the right thing. I can know for certain that I will try to do the right thing, and if nothing else, I can at least be responsible for my own actions, but I can't be responsible for other people's actions, which means that's another sort of reason is that I don't want the original members to how well that works out as being reflective of how well it could actually work out. So yeah, anything with human relationships gets complicated. Essentially, I want there to be a fallback where even if everyone else were to go bonkers and leave or destroy or ruin the reputation of what I would be trying to create, that it would still be such that I had been trying to do the right thing and that I had been trying something with a group of people, but if they end up doing something bad and soiling the reputation of the movement, that would be very bad, and which would be good reason to be very strict about what qualifications would be necessary to be part of the movement. There's a deer out in the field there. It's a beautiful, beautiful morning. But nevertheless, I think it's sort of the risk versus reward type of scenario. The risk is that the group of people that I get together would end up being very negative in terms of the overall progression of the movement. But the reward would be that they actually are able to accomplish way more than I would be able to myself. And it's not even really about who accomplishes more. It's about how this system actually works out, because the whole point of the movement is coordinating people together. So I suppose you could say that doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be this community of people. Perhaps it's like if there was another person like me who liked to do things by themselves, but wanted their efforts to be coordinated with other people, then then like they could coordinate efforts. But at the end of the day, they might still be doing things on their own, trying to make a difference on their own. I guess that is very true as well. So either way, it's about the coordination. At some point, the coordination between people has to start. And it would seem to me that likely that will be sort of a community of people, but it doesn't have to be like some around the campfire scenario. It could be every individual in their own way doing their thing, but then sort of as being part of the movement, they help coordinate their efforts with everyone else and in terms of aiming toward the goal, the future world that they're all collectively aiming for. I think that's sort of the issue that a lot of the world is facing. Like, we could coordinate, just oftentimes we don't want to because our definition of a better future isn't the same as someone else's. And sort of everything else trails down from there, like value systems are not the same. Ethical decision-making are not the same. And on and on. I suppose I'm starting to think of parallels between the movement coordination and like a typical one-to-one relationship where you will heavily scope out a potential partner and you will go through sort of a evolutionary decision-making process to ensure that the partner is the actual partner that you want. And then you coordinate a lot of things to make it easier for both of you. And it's sort of both have benefits, shared resources, that sort of thing. And it gets a little bit more complicated because a lot of times it's like governed by a religion or other sort of complicated things. But it is sort of the same general idea. Oh, there's a deer down in there too, I think. I think so. Oh yeah, it is. Oh, I think it's they're so cool the way they jump. So yeah, I guess it's basically the same thing. Every individual would be strictly looking for other individuals who meet certain qualifications. It's sort of like you could also imagine as like a friend group. The friend group, like maybe some member of the friend group makes a new friend and wants to bring that friend into the friend group. So they bring them to an event here and an event there, and eventually, if the person meshes with the rest of the friend group, then they become part of the friend group. But it's typically an unsaid rule that every member of the friend group seek to find someone that's somewhat compatible with the rest of the friend group. And I guess that's the way it would be with the movement social network, is that there would be that sort of interview process and figuring out if people actually want to do the right thing, and dialing into like if the people will be selfless and come together. And so, yeah. It still raises the question of how exactly we're going to get going with it. Are we going to, am I personally going to start finding people who sort of start interviewing people, figuring out if they really want the best thing? But then also, like, what's going to be expected of that person? Is it just that they are a member and they contribute where they can, sort of like typical memberships go? Or is it something different, where if the person decides to join, it's an ongoing give and take situation, or essentially value exchange situation? It's not exactly clear. But I suppose you'd have to start somewhere, and I think I'd probably need to formulate the main principles of the movement a little bit better, a little bit in a more concise manner, and sort of formalize more what the characteristics of members should be, what it means to be on a journey where you are individually trying to become the best version of yourself, and what it would mean to sort of help others on that journey. Yeah, it's all very interesting. I guess I will try to formalize things better, sort of tighten things up, make sure all the bolts are properly tightened, and then sort of begin the online search and investigation, interview process, that sort of thing. And at least I could start to get people's take on the idea, that because it's not really worth it to get people's take on the idea from people who literally never think about this type of thing. Like their opinion of it is probably not going to matter a whole lot, because they're not on the journey to become the best version of themselves. They're not on the journey to care about anyone else. They're just on the journey of trying to find someone special, or that sort of thing, or grow in their career or something like that. And so once you find people that do actually appear to be searching to do the right thing, they're likely to be somewhat opinionated, even more so than someone who doesn't think about the idea ever. And so they might have conflicting ideas, and so it's a good opportunity to let those ideas challenge your own ideas, and if their ideas truly are better, then sure, we should probably switch up my own sort of ideas. If I'm truly on the journey to be a selfless individual, wanting the best for mankind, then the system should be set up that allows for the best for mankind. And if someone else has an idea or an approach for how to do that better, then first of all, that can go into the overall system for determining the best possible future and the best way to get to that possible future. I suppose there would be potential concerns from others that, like, of whether or not I'm trustworthy, of whether or not I'm just creating something that's only cringeworthy at this point, and I'm too transparent or too awkward or whatever. So there would be sort of that resistance. There would be the resistance of like, well, that sounds nice, but like, do you have any results? Are you actually going to do anything great? And there would be resistance of like, okay, but why should I give you my time? Like, there's other ventures that maybe have results that would deliver more per time. But the whole idea is it's not meant to be, oh, I'm just getting people to contribute their time and resources toward a goal. It's that, like, each individual person, it's how each individual person, you're helping them and their efforts, their desire to become the best version of themselves. It's a symbiotic relationship. And so I think that's the most reasonable explanation for that one in particular. I have thought a lot about the whole social network and community creation type of dynamic from my very long history of wanting to build better cities and sort of figuring out what is the ultimate sort of social organization of individuals, from my desire to have a great social organization, yet the knowledge of how most of the time it's not truly beneficial to anyone involved. But a lot of those thoughts are sort of complex and hard to restate exactly. But I'm still trying to figure out what the takeaway here is. And I think it's essentially that, yes, if the whole point of the movement is to coordinate people together to actually accomplish things, then at some point you have to bring people together. And it makes sense that you would have a sort of original round where you're testing ideas, you're ensuring that self-organizing principles work, that everyone involved is just so thankful to be a part of it, because it helps them to have purpose. It provides them with so many benefits and gives them so many opportunities and that sort of thing. And once you get to that point, then sort of by definition the movement can sort of self-organize and grow just from that initial group of people and sort of expand outward. But I still think you'd want to be researching ways to capture the imagination and go down that route. But yeah, you really do need that initial group of people. So how am I going to do that? I'm going to have to do online research, finding people that not only sort of think that way, but will be willing to try it out. Sort of the willingness, sort of to be selfless, to go along with an idea that someone else has, and that the idea is only really a way to coordinate. It's not that it's a controlling idea of this vision of the future is the one that you have to agree with. Sort of, well, I guess sort of in a original way, I am sort of defining the vision of the future by definition, which is that it's the best possible one for all involved. Like, after you've defined the best, like all this stuff. So, but I don't know a reasonable critique to that other than saying, oh, we can never truly know what is the best possible future. So we might as well just make it diverse, where everyone's shooting for different versions. And maybe that is better, but I still think we should at least know what the best versions are. We can't have everyone shooting for bad versions of the future, and probably doing so sort of unknowingly. If they're doing so knowingly, then help us all, but if they're shooting for the worst possible future unknowingly, then that wouldn't make any sense. Or then you might as well tell them, hey, just so you know, you're not shooting for anything that's going to be beneficial to your children and grandchildren, and you're only potentially benefiting yourself. But even at that rate, you're not even benefiting yourself. So yeah, willingness, sort of and other qualifications that I'll probably need to determine more so. Okay, that's been a exploration into starting the original group of people to be involved with the movement. Hopefully it won't take forever. That's the other problem, is the time involved. I'd have to set things up so that it doesn't take very long, so that when we do socialize, it's beneficial, it's productive, it's vastly enjoyable. It can be combined with other efforts that individuals are doing. And would be of sort of where people are on a sort of semi-equal playing field, so that it doesn't feel like you're having to constantly bring people up to speed with ideas that, for the most part, most people have been working toward becoming the best version of themselves and are at a state where they can actually be truly beneficial to all. Okay. Thank you. Our journey continues. After that exploration into thinking through sort of how we would start the original membership group, that got me thinking about how important and how, like, I'm kind of feeling excited to dive into how you would go about finding those people and attracting those people. And I'm thinking maybe creating some sort of movie on YouTube that's like high quality enough. Just put like a lot of time into a short film type of thing. And that sort of showcases the main premise of the idea that people can watch and sort of give them a rundown. Because just giving them all this information or telling them to watch hours of YouTube videos isn't exactly going to be efficient for them. So first, I think I would like to, so this is the transcription from what I was just saying. And I'm going to run this through GPT. Basically what I'm going to say is thinking through the facets of starting such a group. And first I want to get GPT 4.0 perspective. So ChatGPT, I would like to dive into the facets of starting such a group that I talk about here. Can you help me to dissect and determine these facets and sort of spark the imagination on what avenues to start thinking about? The other thing is that I do kind of have some thinking. I mean, I do have a lot of thinking about this type of stuff, but not really related to the movement. So I'm just gonna have all that other stuff that I thought about, like, in my mind, ready to pull up. Basically, potential resources or enlightened social network. I think it was EASN, Enlightened Algorithmic Social Network. And I think I've thought about it in the movement founding book as well. Okay, so clearly define what your movement aims to achieve. Long-term vision. So that's what I've been doing. Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of thinking that it's either going to be something where I have a conversation with someone and go through some points about this or that about the movement, or I sort of create a compelling movie that I can show people, and I can then meet up with them, but if at least I can show them the movie. So I'm going to put those thoughts here as we come up with them. That clearly establishes the objectives and articulates the philosophical foundations, while also capturing the imagination, starting to help people to fall in love with the movement and the cause, and basically get people inspired. In general, the movement is not meant to be exclusive. It's meant to be inclusive of everyone, but inclusive of everyone that wants to be included, which means that you'd have to still identify if someone truly wants to be included in the adventure. Which means you'd have to sort of have an interview with the important interview questions, etc. Period. We would have to develop strategies for recruiting, which could include the movie and could include finding specific individuals who are particularly likely to want to be in the movement. Determine the minimum level required to ensure that a pilot group would be feasible and would actually work and would have all of the main ideas thought through beforehand so that it would be possible to determine to quickly evolve. Through challenges. Okay, so I'm kind of thinking that I'd like to explore the idea of the movie. I'm thinking this would generally go under here, and it would go creating a movie or short film. Define the core message. Emotional appeal. Narrative structure, cinematography, casting, music, target audience. Now, I've had for a long time, since I was a child, this concept of creating a movie that could change lives through inspiring change. Although this is likely tied into, as a child, the desire of wanting to become famous and such. However, I still think it's intriguing that a movie could be something that could spark the initial flame. Now, when I say movie, I'm generally thinking of not a Hollywood blockbuster and not like a low budget film in real life type of thing. I'm thinking more of like a YouTube documentary type of situation. where I sort of create images. I do a lot of sound design. I do all the design of a movie, but instead of having actual shots of situations, it would probably be AI generated imagery and AI generated animations and potentially AI generated video. But even if that AI stuff can't really be brought about, it could still just be me in front of a green screen with different angles, sort of talking through various aspects and kind of laying out everything in a clear, concise manner. And I do have all the equipment for that, except for the actual green cloth, but I think I even have that. And I would just try to spend a lot of time to make that movie particularly engaging and thoughtful and concise and inspiring. So I'd have to plan out like how exactly I would make it inspiring. I'm not totally sure. But I think the general premise is good. Because my thought is that some people will read books, and I could write a book, but that people simply are not going to want to read a book. If I cold email someone and say, hey, I have this really cool idea, I think you could be part of a movement that could change the world. And I'm like, here, read my treatise. And, if people are really interested, they might read your treatise. But it would be even better if you had made a really concise, well laid out video. Sort of talking through the main ideas. Now, of course, really the important part is the story. So let me do a little bit of mind mapping on what could be a potential couple options for top stories. It could be something similar to The Choice or to the Universal Choice book, where it kind of showcases the current perception of reality, the options that we have, and that we're either trending toward dystopia or we're trending toward utopia, and that there's some sort of choice that we can make between the two. And then the question is, well, what do you do once you've made that choice? What really can any one person do? And maybe I showcase part of my YouTube journey as I kind of restart at the beginning with that question. What can any one person do? And as I progress, I seem to always come back to this same idea that any one person can do things, and you would want the ability for any one person to be able to really make changes. But that what you'd really want is for people to be able to coordinate together in a sort of movement methodology to coordinate efforts in order to actually
make the world a better place. And so I would then talk through basically what I've been thinking, what I've been coming up with, the whole idea of determining the best possible future, determining the best way to get to that future, to sort of thinking through how you would inspire that, thinking through how you would maintain individuality, thinking about how you would have checks and balances and all of this stuff. And sort of lay out the need for something like this, but that it would kind of state, like, I'm not a special human with any special fate. I'm just a regular person, and with all the flaws of regular people, and I really don't know the perfect answer to anything. This just seems to me to be a decent answer. And so really all I want is for the best possible thing to happen. And if that's not this idea of what I have, that's fine. I'll do something else. But the other option has to make more sense to me. If it doesn't make more sense to me, it has to be there has to be some sort of reasoning, some sort of some sort of actual reasoning as to why that is a better option. Otherwise, I'm just going to go back and try to do my own thing, and without anyone's help. But essentially, I'd probably outline a whole bunch of things about a lot of the different options that we could do, why this is a good time to do it, because now is always the best time to do the most important thing that needs to be done. So that would be a very, I don't know if analytical is the right word, but analytical way of expressing the ideas. But I wonder if people don't necessarily want an analytical explanation. They would much rather have a narrative story explanation for what I'm doing. And I could just tell my story, and that's kind of what I laid out. Sort of telling the story of what I'm doing. And that would probably be one of the better ways of doing it, because then people are like, okay, that's the whole story. Whereas if I went in more of like a metaphorical movie style, kind of thinking through the ideas, it might be a little too distant and too complicated. And so I think rooting it in reality and in my actual story is probably the best way to do it. And then I can just say, if you want to see how I came up with this exact movie script, literally, I've worked through it all on YouTube, and you can go look at it. Like, I'm not hiding anything. I'm not trying to become some special leader or gain some special powers. I'm just trying to do the right thing. And this seems like the right thing. Period. It's a little bit long-winded, but what are you going to do? Let me feed that into GPT and get its feedback. Na 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 Now, a movie is feasible, right? I mean, I could write the script today, probably get through most of it, and start planning out how to actually create an engaging movie. But then there's all the other stuff, like, am I actually finished figuring out all the details? Well, in one respect, when you're creating the movie, that would force you to figure out all the details that you haven't figured out yet. The main details I haven't figured out yet are the actual mechanism for coordination. That is truly essential. Because all of these, I mean, these two are the initial starter group. And everything else here relies on creating the initial starter group to kind of get things rolling and help determine the best possible future. So then the real technical difficulty becomes how to actually coordinate, which then that gets into like the means of coordination through software. And then that gets into like app development and that sort of thing. Perhaps we'll need to narratively explore means of coordination through software. Actually, let's put this here. Narrative expositions offer a fantastic way of seeing things in a light that you would not have been able to see just by running various models in your own mind. Narratively progressing through a storyline in one's mind allows one to see more and explore more ideas. And with a concept so difficult as the actual means by which this level of extreme coordination, which is essentially the bedrock of the movement actually functioning, is some ideas for a narrative exploration. We have done one narrative exploration with someone living in I think it was Salvor. The story of him sort of experiencing the movement, but we didn't really get into how actually coordination would take place. So I think we need to think through multiple characters, multiple different types of personalities, what they spend their time doing, and how they would actually coordinate efforts with other people, how the software would look, how the software was developed, and that sort of thing. Period. New line. Perhaps the story of someone who was experiencing a lack of purpose in the world and wanted to do something truly beneficial, and then I would have reached out to them online and sent them the movie, and that movie sort of got them thinking and inspired, and the person just realized they might as well give it a try. And so then the story kind of progresses about what happens next. They have an interview, they sort of understand like what benefits they would get and in what areas they would try to contribute, and how the general coordination process would work. Period. Perhaps by providing this additional context, it will be possible to think through in a better way how that actual coordination process would take place. Period. New line. Perhaps the story of someone who is busy in life, has kept themselves busy chasing their career, growing a family, all of this type of stuff. And they still feel like it's all like they haven't actually hit the mark yet, and that they'd really like to actually make a difference in the world, not just continue to follow societal norms. And so we would walk through how even a busy person with a family could contribute to such a change. And for the most part, in the beginning stages, I'd really be exploring how the coordination would take place among an initial starter group. After that starter group itself would probably enhance and figure out better ways to communicate and to coordinate, etc. But in the beginning, you'd have to have some sort of structure that you could point to in the movie of saying, this is how things are going to be coordinated. Like, you're not going to have to attend board meetings every other week. You're going to be able to spend time doing the thing that you love to make the world a better place, and that could be coordinated with someone else in a way that benefits both of you and everyone else, etc. Okay, this has been good. We got into what are going to be the main challenges for starting with the beginning members, and then we went into thinking through an original movie, and then we went into trying to nail down exactly how coordination will take place. And that is going to be a very tough question and probably take a while to figure out, but we got that started by thinking through different ways that we could narratively explore it. All right, thank you.
Let's continue. It seems like a very anticlimactic solution to life's problems. Could the solution literally be just ample coordination? Why is that the bedrock foundation on which a lot of the other things that I'm talking about rely? Question mark. Humans already coordinate, and that's how we've been able to accomplish many, many things in the world. And so one would think that we've settled it, that perhaps there are better ways of coordinating, but there's no new way which will solve all the problems that we have. But it's one of those things where it cannot be assumed that there's not a solution right in front of our face. That's a combination of the solutions that we already have. A lot of times, humans never really truly execute things the way they were imagined. And so I think it inadequate to say that just because we have not figured out a way to coordinate properly, that we can therefore not use coordination to solve many of the problems that we are facing. But with that in mind, let's start on a narrative. As I mentioned, narratives are great ways to explore things and ideas. I don't exactly have a vision of what I'd like to explore. I mean, I know we just wrote those things. And I think this is not, it's not actually that name, it's something else. It's like something like that. Okay. Yeah, it just seems like even as I'm thinking about it, how could I write a fun narrative? It just doesn't seem like it would be a fun story to write about how coordination solves the problems. Perhaps the solution to the world's problems does not have to be climactic. And perhaps that has been our problem all along, that we've been looking for some extra special climactic solution when it's literally just been as simple as coordinating together properly. And I know there's so many other dynamics, don't get me wrong, it's just that one can only explore a couple different dynamics at once. I understand that there's lots of other things that would result in coordination being an issue and etc. Okay. The story of coordination. What would the story be about? Someone who experiences coordination, someone who's on the side of coordination, someone who is against the idea of coordination, someone who sees the benefits of coordination, someone who's lived in a world where they've coordinated together for a long time. I'm not sure. But I sat on the hillside, overlooking the cliffs and the oceans below. The warm breeze blowing through my hair, the smell of the forest and of the ocean and of the sun. The rays of the sun beginning to shine on my face, the sparkle of the sun reflecting on the water, the sound of birds all around, the rustling of vines and limbs of trees and bushes and flowers around me. This was paradise, and I knew it was paradise, and I felt like it was paradise. And it was actually paradise. There were no issues in the world. There was no great debates which was splitting apart humanity. There were no major calamities which were killing off many people. Most people lived very happy lives. And I knew that it hadn't always been this way, but it just seemed like at this point it just felt like it had always been this way. To imagine a world where it was not paradise for everyone would be hard to imagine. Just as I imagine it would be hard for people not living in paradise to imagine living in a paradise. I imagine that would be even more difficult than imagining a world that is not paradise. For who would have ever thought that humans could work together, could truly work together in the best of ways? Very simple solutions to all the problems that seem to plague the last generations. I was here enjoying this hillside, and just today, just now, in the relaxing of the day, in the beauty of the breeze, I just wanted to reflect on how we got here. What was the actual solution? And I wanted to do this because I wanted to think about what it was that had made the difference, what it was that was keeping us from this paradise, and how not to let those things creep up and to let new things creep up. For paradise was not assured, but we had had it now for so long and had always been able to resolve every conflict so well that it seemed nearly impossible that paradise would not remain. Period. I had learned about the past history in my childhood as I grew up and learned about all sorts of things. How the sun grows plants on the earth. How the wind moves, and even though you cannot see it, it moves things. How the cycles of life work. How the cycle of water works. All of the deep scientific questions of physics and chemistry. All were taught to me, and I learned to be curious. I learned to ask why. We still did not really know how it had all come about,
But we did know our history, and we knew enough about the base reality to know that life was a mystery, but a beautiful one. And we had to just get by with not knowing the full answer to why we were here. People were still working on it, but it wasn't something which caused us to not have joy and beauty and to enjoy life to the absolute fullest. It was just something that we kept looking for, while we were also pretty content with simply not knowing. Period. So, in these lessons that I learned as a child, I learned about what it was like before the world was a paradise. Before all the forests have been restored to their full glory. Before all people were the best versions of themselves, living magnificent lives, long and healthy and joy-filled. Before all humans were treated equally. Before knowledge was fully available to every human. Before food was available to every human. Before technology had really started advancing. Of course, at the time, they thought that technology was advancing, but compared to now, it was hardly advanced at all. But there was something really interesting about that time. I imagine those people would have felt about the knights, about the medieval times, like I feel now about those people in their cars and suburban houses and city skyscrapers. Such a nostalgic time of resource depletion, of killing off ecosystems and people just not getting along. It was interesting, but made them seem so primitive. Why had they not grasped ideas so simple that even a child could understand them? Of course, back then many children didn't understand much of anything because they weren't taught much of anything, because their parents didn't seem to care about their children. Their parents seemed to only care about leaving some sort of legacy, or really they didn't even care about the children. It was just more of an evolutionary desire which had fueled the creation of children. There were so many things to say about people back then. But what you could not say was that there were not some people at that time who had given up. Despite it being popular culture to deny that the world could be anything but a dystopian future. Despite societal pressures and peer pressure driving people to do things that they simply did not want. The games of geopolitics and games of economies driving companies and countries to do things and to race toward goals and do things in ways and cause outcomes that no one really wanted. It's just the nature of things. But no one was coordinated enough to make a a change in the whole system. The system was flawed, and most people just wanting to live a selfish life, gaining status or power or other basic evolutionary desires. I mostly just felt sorry for them and felt happy that I could at least relate to the people back then who knew that paradise was possible and who had worked toward creating it so that people like me in this world, sitting on this mountainside with the breeze, so that we could live in paradise. For those people, I am thankful. Those simple ideas which those people seemed to see, but which everyone else seemed to completely dismiss, was simply the idea of working together, of actually figuring out a common goal that all humanity could strive for, of actually setting aside petty arguments and working toward primary objectives that everyone agreed with. What was the point of arguing over some debate, some petty argument that literally did not matter? I thought to those people which had caused the change and how they must have been frustrated at the world that they were in, knowing that paradise could have been possible even when they were alive, but that no one before them had been willing to take the stand. No one before them had been willing to look foolish in front of everyone else, while there had been so much culture around and so many religious beliefs and ways of life which seemed to say that the world could not become a truly great place. For if it became truly great, it was only in one person's definition, like perhaps an environmentalist's position, where the earth returned to its natural state but there were no humans left. Perhaps the best state was humans covering the earth, yet the earth a complete wasteland. Everyone thought everything was a dichotomy, that the future would either be terrible or really terrible. Very few seemed to think that a good future was actually in the realm of possibility. No one even really thought about those things, too busy in things, in those petty arguments, in the nothingness of busyness, which absolutely meant nothing. But what am I saying? I am thankful for those people who were willing to take a stand, who were willing to point out that working together was the way to get through this. Such a simple solution. Working together? Well, people have been working together for such a long time before that, but why hadn't it worked out in this sort of instrumental way? It's because no one was working together on that sort of scale. It was always country against country, or larger than that, religion versus religion, or some other ideology versus ideology, all with other status games, economy games, war games, so many other dynamics which were preventing people from actually working toward a future that everyone wanted, but no one seemed to think or do anything which would actually create that world. There were people who, it seemed, believed in it, yet did absolutely nothing to make it happen. And the things that they would do, they thought were making a difference, but anyone could tell they weren't making any difference at all. It seemed that people had to live in a state of cognitive dissonance, permanent cognitive dissonance, where they would make a nice life for themselves and then do things here and there to help all the other people. What is that? Is that freedom? Letting other people go to do their thing and knowing that it's possible that those other people could progress, but not actually doing anything about it, just making your own nice life? The people that actually sparked the change, they knew it had to be a group effort. They knew that everyone had to work together. They knew that they couldn't just be another group of people, another person who made a nice life for themselves, but seemed to forget everyone else. And by creating a nice life for themselves, often put many, many other people at a disadvantage. Even though it wasn't fair at all that they happened to be born into a place where they had the opportunity to create a better future, while someone else born somewhere else really would take so much more to break out of that cycle. Period. New line. During those lessons, I had learned about how the initial people had come together and started what was known as the movement. The movement, which was a original name, and its idea of the way to solve the problems in the world was equally as original, of working together, of coordinating, of working together to not only find a vision of the future that everyone agreed with, but to find a way for everyone to work together in a way that everyone agreed with, in a coordinated effort. At that point, there were billions of people on Earth, and now there are billions of people on Earth, and we are living on many other planets. Most people were too busy, too distracted to actually work toward making a difference, to actually coordinate with someone else. How could they coordinate with someone about how to make a grand movie when they were too busy watching and playing video games, too busy being distracted by short-form content, too busy searching after some status game, too busy working a job just so they could get a little bit extra money to get a partner that they wanted to be able to achieve, and other totally misleading ideas. It seemed that some people back then knew that all of those status games meant nothing. And they knew that they would perhaps fall behind in the grand scheme of the game of life that most people thought, but that they would get ahead in the game of life that really mattered, which was making a difference for the future and for the lives that would come after, and even their own later lives. But there was a small group of people who started the whole process, coming together simply to pilot the experience, to start just as a small group coordinating together to make a difference. At that time, there were things like businesses and organizations and families and so many other things that coordinated. So how is this any different? Well, the simple idea was that no one was really coordinating fully. No one really trusted the other person. No one really could depend on another person. Every individual was not actually becoming the best version of themselves, someone capable of actually benefiting someone else in a coordinated effort. The idea was that no one really believed it was possible. And the small group of people just decided that they didn't know if it was impossible. They thought it would be better to treat a better future world as possible and work toward it, even if most people said it was impossible. So they actually believed what they talked about. But it wasn't just belief. That was the whole point of the movement. They did the thing that most probably seemed like the best thing to do, and most probably seemed like the best way to do it. If that small group of people wanted to change the world by creating a bunch of short-form content that they could spread all over the internet to get people to see what they were about, they would come together, each individual contributing to enable massive amounts of positive short-form content to be created. They knew that narratives were ways of grabbing the attention, of capturing the imagination of people who were starting to become interested in the whole topic. And so they would come together to write books. And by becoming the best version of themselves, each person would learn to write amazing stories. They would go on trips together through the jungles and forests, gathering knowledge and experiences to share, thinking and having deep conversations at all times about history, about the biggest problems, about the biggest questions that there are. Taking the idea of changing the world seriously, for once, and in a way that wasn't just some person's dream, some charismatic leader's happenstance vision of what they thought was the best possible future, but rather a future that they all could agree upon. Period. Other ways that this small group had coordinated was through resource sharing. Not in a way that was before them. There were things like communism and small community sharing, but rather the idea of coordinated resource sharing, where if someone wanted to own something because they wanted to treasure and take care of that thing, then other people could just find out who had that thing, ask for that thing, and because both people were the best possible versions of themselves, they could share, they could trade a resource, they could just have a conversation, they could communicate, they could discuss about whether that resource was actually needed. And of course, there were other just more basic community-related sharing where the community would go together to buy some resource that the small group would own together. But as I was thinking about this future in this small group, I began to realize how proud I was of that small group. Imagining just how hard it would have been to actually try to do the right thing. Instead of trying to gain power, to be able to control politics in order to change the laws so that the right thing could happen, they started with themselves and then grew outward. It was always about changing one's own life in order to work together with everyone else in order to change their lives for the better. And it wasn't just some religious thing. It wasn't just some believe in the greatness that the world could become. It was logic and basic thinking of just working together. It wasn't that everyone had to agree. It wasn't that someone had to be leader and everyone else had to follow the rules. It was that people could think for themselves, could live their own best life, but do it alongside other people who were doing that same thing, and other people who weren't just trying to live a life of selfishness, but were trying to live a life to benefit the future, to not let themselves get sidetracked by all the multitudes of distractions. I just couldn't stop thinking about how thankful I was for that small group of people who looked past themselves in the time and place when they were alive to think about the future and the possibilities in it. That group of people, as part of living the best life of themselves, did things which just made sense, like living the healthiest that they could, like engaging in positive relationships, like learning as many new things as they could, like not being naive, like engaging in the greatest of hobbies, like not getting too stressed out, like being willing to take breaks, like being willing to step back, like being willing to change their minds. That was that movement. It was hard, I'm sure, for that group of people, but they were the ones that sparked the flame that truly made a difference. They were the ones that finally made something happen that could actually turn into something, a force which could not be stopped, which if ever evolved into the best possible thing. No more fighting against ideologies that people did not agree with. Sure, there were debates and decisions to be made and whatnot, but at the end of the day, everyone, they realized, that was engaging was human-based or AI-based, all based in the world that they experienced, all with the same basic desires, evolutionary desires and desires within the mind, to live a great life, to help others from suffering, from living a bad life, to fulfilling their inner desire to make a difference. They knew they didn't know all the answers. They suspected that they didn't know even the right way to start, but that they would start and at any given point be doing the things which most probably were the best things to do at that time. I got up from my spot along the mountainside and began climbing one of the trees. I could climb one of the trees because I was strong. I thought back to the time before paradise, to when people's bodies were weak and caused them pain. Now my body was rarely in pain, and I could do so many beautiful things, like being able to climb a tree and do any physical activity that I wanted to do. Nowadays, there was abundance, and coordination was something that just happened. Everyone worked together. It was the foundation of civilization. People just worked together to accomplish things. And by now there was very little that had to be worked together on, because in terms of challenges, but there was so much that people worked together on creating the most beautiful of creations, of creating the most beautiful of virtual reality adventures, of exploring the physical universe and terraforming and creating beautiful habitats and planets. We got together now. Everyone did. There were still opinions to be had, but if someone really wanted to just go to war, they would go on a virtual adventure. No one really wanted to destroy the physical universe because they cared about other people. It was basic things that people back then just weren't doing. People back then simply weren't caring about other people. They simply weren't always doing the right thing. They simply weren't taking care of their bodies. They were almost always in a state of mental disrepair because of the food they were eating, the nutrition they were ingesting, the exercise that they weren't doing, and the knowledge that they weren't gaining. But nowadays, people were the best versions of themselves. There were challenges to be had, like creating better and better virtual reality adventures, like exploring farther and farther, and whole other sets of things which people back in that time wouldn't have imagined or even possible. The paradises that would be completely indescribable to them. But that group of people, and as the movement grew more and more back then, they truly cared. They were truly trying. And for that, I was happy. For that, I was thankful. As I sat in the tree, seeing the sun and the birds flutter by, and the breeze continuing to blow past my face. Life was so amazing, And it just seemed appropriate to just appreciate the people that had made that possible. The people who everyone seemed to reject. All the religious fanatics seeming to say that the world could not be a good place. That one would have to wait until the afterlife, until the world would be a better place, and meanwhile to just let it go. People of all sorts of ideologies thinking that a better world truly was not possible given human nature and this or that idea. But that group of people just slowly kept plodding along, seeking after something which they knew was potentially possible, but they didn't really know if it was truly possible. But that was the choice that they had made. The choice to try in the face of rejection. The choice to make a difference when peer pressure was to just make your own life great. The choice to not get distracted by the distractions which society said that people must engage with. Period. All I could be was thankful. Okay, so thoughts on this? Definitely the narrative helped me to think about things more, to get my head in the right place when it comes to, like, if you were a person at that time, looking back at people living when we're living now, they would just be, like, what would they be thinking? What would they be experiencing? And they'd probably be experiencing thanks for the people that were actually willing to make a difference. And then we sort of explored ideas on how they would coordinate, and the theme kind of was that it wasn't anything complicated. It was simple things, but done in a serious manner. Instead of doing things half-heartedly, people were doing things to the fullest extent. Alright, thank you so much. I will see you tomorrow.